Do you believe a plane could vanish without a trace? On Christmas Eve in 1969, Pacific Air 412 took off from Seattle, carrying 112 passengers, but it never reached its destination. No distress signal, no wreckage. It was as if the plane had never existed. 53 years later, scientists unexpectedly discovered a metallic object buried deep beneath the Yukon ice. But when they began excavation, they found something even more unsettling than the missing aircraft. The footprints of a German shepherd. How could a dog's footprints appear more than half a century later? This isn't just a story about a plane crash. It's a story of loyalty, survival, and a mystery that has never been solved. Are you ready to uncover the truth? If you love heartwarming and thrilling stories about dogs, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Dog Stories right now. Your support means the world to us. So what really happened to Pacific Air 412? Let's dive into the story. Christmas Eve, 1969. Snow blanketed the Alaskan sky, thick flakes sweeping across the runway like a veil, obscuring the view. At Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, Pacific Air 412 was completing its final pre-flight checks before takeoff. It was supposed to be just a routine 3-hour journey from Washington to Anchorage, Alaska. But no one knew this would be its final flight. Sam Porter tightened the straps of his backpack as he climbed the aircraft stairs, with Odin, his loyal German shepherd, right by his side. Odin never left Sam's side, his steps steady, like a second soldier. Sam had served in the military for over a decade, and Odin wasn't just a pet. He was a brother in arms, the companion who had stood by him through the brutal war zones of Germany. Sam made his way to the back of the cabin, settling into a seat near the rear where there was more space for Odin to stretch out comfortably. Around him, passengers were finding their seats, their voices filling the cabin with quiet chatter. The holiday spirit was still alive. Many carried wrapped gifts, eager to reunite with their families for Christmas Eve. In the cockpit, Captain Grayson Everett ran through the final checks, his voice calm but cautious as he communicated with air traffic control. A snowstorm was forming near the Yukon Range, but according to meteorological data, it remained outside the flight path. Clearance for takeoff was granted. At 9:07 p.m., Pacific Air 412 rolled down the runway and lifted into the sky, vanishing into the snow-filled darkness. 10:19 p.m., the first sign of trouble. About an hour after takeoff, Pacific Air 412 cruised at 30,000 feet over Canadian airspace. Most passengers had dozed off or stared quietly out the windows, where nothing but endless darkness stretched beyond the glass. Sam leaned back against his seat while Odin curled up at his feet. But suddenly, Odin's ears perked up. His body tensed. A low growl rumbled from his chest as his eyes fixated toward the front of the plane. Sam frowned. Odin never reacted like this unless something was truly wrong. In the cockpit, Captain Grayson Everett noticed a sudden, sharp drop in external temperature, 15 degrees colder than forecasted. Worse, the pressure gauges began fluctuating erratically. He reached for the control panel, attempting to stabilize the system. But the moment his fingers touched the switches, a sharp explosion rang out. Engine 3 lost pressure. Control tower, this is Pacific 412. We have an engine failure but are still maintaining control. Roger, Pacific 412. Confirm your current position? We are. Hold on. Grayson stared at the radar screen. His plane had just vanished from the navigation system. 10:43 p.m., the final transmission. In the cabin below, passengers began to sense the change. A slight tremor ran through the aircraft. Murmurs spread, voices rising in nervous conversation. Odin suddenly sprang to his feet. His paws scraped anxiously against the floor. Sam ran his hand down the dog's back, trying to calm him, but a deep unease had already settled in his chest. And then, the cabin lights flickered. Flight attendants hurried to reassure the passengers, but tension rippled through the air. In the cockpit, Captain Grayson Everett desperately tried to send an emergency transmission. The radio crackled with heavy static. No GPS, no contact with ground control. The plane drifted into darkness, as if it had just entered a space where no human had ever been. Finally, a weak, broken signal came through the radio. Pacific 412, something in the ice? It's not. Then, silence. Air traffic control called out repeatedly. But Pacific Air 412 had vanished. 53 years later, Not a single trace. Rescue teams were deployed that very night. They searched for weeks, even months, but there was no sign of a crash, no wreckage, no black box signal, no trace of the 112 passengers and crew. It became known as one of the most mysterious disappearances in U.S. aviation history. Theories spread like wildfire. Some believed the plane had been pulled into an unrecorded electromagnetic storm. Others claimed it had crashed into a glacial valley so deep it could never be found. But the strangest part? There was never a single distress signal from Pacific 412's cockpit that night. As if the flight had never existed. The winds howled across the Yukon mountain range, sweeping snow over the endless frozen landscape. Beneath the thick ice, secrets had remained buried for decades, until a strange signal appeared on a climate research team's radar. Dr. Olivia Hayes squinted through the helicopter's windshield as it descended over the survey site. At 45 years old, the environmental researcher had spent most of her career studying climate shifts in Alaska's frozen wilderness. But what she was about to uncover had nothing to do with climate change. A few weeks earlier, a NASA satellite image had detected a metallic object buried beneath a massive ice formation, nearly 200 miles from where Pacific Air 412 was believed to have gone missing. At first, her team assumed it was a mineral-rich ice formation, a common anomaly in glacial terrain. But upon closer analysis, its shape became unmistakable. It could be the wreckage of a plane. As Olivia stepped off the helicopter, the freezing wind slashed against her skin like 1,000 tiny blades. She pulled her thick fur-lined coat tighter and turned to her research team. "Get the seismic scanners ready," she ordered. "We need to determine the exact depth of this object before excavation begins." As the technical team began setting up their equipment, Olivia walked around the site, sensing the eerie silence that hung over the landscape. No birds, no signs of wildlife. Only one thing stood out: footprints in the snow. She stopped, crouching down for a closer look. The prints were deep, evenly spaced, stretching along the frozen ground. Judging by their size and shape, they looked exactly like the tracks of a German shepherd. Olivia frowned. There shouldn't be any dogs out here. This was an isolated wasteland, hundreds of miles from the nearest settlement. There were no wolf packs, no wildlife that could have left such precise tracks. But these prints weren't old. The snow hadn't yet begun to cover them, which meant they had appeared recently. As night fell, the team set up camp beside the excavation site. A few members gathered around the fire, chatting about the strange discovery from that morning. An older man in the group, Thomas Keller, a seasoned local guide who had spent over 30 years in the Yukon, quietly sipped his hot coffee before speaking up. "You know, there's a legend in this region." All eyes turned toward him. "The locals call it the Snow Warrior," Keller continued, "a giant stray dog that appears on stormy nights. It doesn't attack. Instead, it leads the lost back to safety." The fire crackled as he spoke, his voice calm but heavy with something unspoken. "Some say that if you see it, it means you're on the right path. But if it disappears—" He paused, staring into the flames. "It means no one is coming to save you." The atmosphere grew heavy. Some members chuckled awkwardly, brushing it off as just another piece of folklore. But Olivia couldn't shake the thought of the footprints they had found that morning. Prints that belonged to a German shepherd, just like the one Keller had described. The next morning, the team began drilling deeper into the ice. The seismic scanners confirmed that a metallic object was buried 15 meters below the snow and thick ice. Its dimensions matched that of a commercial aircraft fuselage. Olivia watched the monitor as the radar started forming clearer images. A shattered engine propeller, a fractured fuselage. But something was strange. The wreckage was almost completely intact. There were no signs of an explosion. Everything seemed to be progressing smoothly until, "Olivia, you need to see this!" a team member shouted from across the site. She rushed over, more footprints in the snow. But this time, something was even stranger. The footprints led straight to the buried aircraft, and then suddenly disappeared. There were no signs that the animal had turned around or changed direction. It was as if it had walked directly into the ice and vanished. A chill ran down Olivia's spine as she stood there, staring at the last visible print. The excavation team worked tirelessly throughout the day, drilling deeper into the frozen ground. Then, The drill bit hit metal. "We've reached it," a technician announced. The entire team held their breath as the first layer of ice was carefully removed. Beneath it, a dull silver surface glimmered under the floodlights. As the snow and ice were cleared away, letters slowly emerged from beneath the frozen crust. Pacific Air Forward 12. No one spoke. Everyone understood exactly what this meant. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. She glanced down at the snow beside the wreckage where the footprints had vanished. Then, a powerful gust of wind howled through the canyon, whipping snow into a swirling whiteout around them. And in that brief moment, a bark echoed from the distance. A single, sharp bark, carrying through the frozen silence. And then nothing. The sound faded into the white void. Olivia stood frozen in place. The cold that gripped her now wasn't just from the blizzard. It was something else, something she couldn't explain. She turned toward the swirling snow where the wind had kicked up a misty veil of ice. But there was nothing. No movement, no shape, just endless white. "Did you hear that?" one of the technicians asked, his voice rough from the cold. Olivia nodded. They had all heard it. A dog's bark, loud, clear, and gone. But the real problem was, there were no dogs here. No one said another word, just silent glances exchanged, and unspoken doubt lingering between them. Then one of the team members broke the tension with a simple command: find an entry point into the plane. Right now. They turned back to their work, but no matter how hard they tried to focus, none of them could shake the feeling that they weren't truly alone. Dr. Olivia Hayes knelt beside the footprints, her gloved hand brushing lightly over the cold snow. She scanned the area, searching for a rational explanation. But there was nothing. This place was completely desolate. One of the technicians ran a thermal scan over the surface and handed Olivia the results. She studied the screen. The temperature of the snow where the footprints had been was slightly warmer than the surrounding area. "Could a stray dog have passed through recently?" one of the assistants asked. Olivia shook her head. "There are no dogs out here, and if it had just been here, we would have seen it." She turned to Thomas Keller, the local guide who had told them about the legend of the Snow Warrior the night before. "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" Keller was silent for a moment, his gaze drifting across the endless white expanse. Not for the first time. Before anyone could press him for more, a voice from the excavation team cut through the cold air. "You both need to see this." Inside the aircraft's fuselage, the ice had preserved everything almost perfectly. A row of passenger seats remained intact. Seatbelts were still fastened, pulled tight. Carry-on bags were wedged into the overhead compartments. A half-open magazine lay on a tray table, its pages frozen mid-turn. But there was one thing missing: no bodies. The passenger cabin was completely empty. Dr. Olivia Hayes felt a chill creep down her spine. If there were no bodies, then where did the passengers go? At the far end of the cabin, a technician spotted a small metal box wedged beneath one of the seats. It looked as if someone had deliberately hidden it. "What's in the box?" Olivia asked. One of the team members pried it open. Inside was a worn, leather-bound notebook. The pages had yellowed with age, but the writing was still legible. On the first page, faded ink scrawled across the top: Sam Porter, Survival Journal. The team held their breath. The journal of a survivor. Olivia carefully turned the fragile pages. December 25th, 1969. There are 15 of us left. The plane crashed, but we were lucky to survive. No radio signal. No one knows we're alive. December 26th. We took inventory of our supplies. There's only enough food to last about a week. We have to find a way out before it's too late. December 28th. Odin is protecting us. He sensed a patch of thin ice before someone stepped on it. If it weren't for him, we would have lost another person. January 1st, 1970. A massive storm swept through. We lost 3 more. We are not alone. Something is watching us from a distance. January 5th. Odin barked all night. We heard noises in the dark. Not wolves, not the wind, something else. January 7th. We have to leave. No one will find us if we just sit and wait. We're heading out at dawn. If someone ever finds this journal, please remember Odin. January 8th. We set out, but something is waiting for us out there. The last page contained only shaky, uneven handwriting, as if Sam had written it in complete exhaustion. We are not alone. Odin tried to warn us, but I didn't listen. And then, nothing. Olivia tightened her grip on the journal. If Sam Porter and the remaining survivors had left the plane on January 8, 1970, then why was not a single one of them ever found? And more importantly, if Odin had been with them that day, then why were his footprints still appearing in the snow 53 years later? A frigid gust of wind howled through the broken fuselage, sending a thin layer of snow swirling off the rusted metal frame. Olivia turned her head toward the shattered cabin door. For a brief moment, she could have sworn she heard it, a bark echoing from the distance, ringing out across this isolated, frozen wasteland. Was it just an illusion, or was something still watching over this place? The sound lingered in Olivia's mind as she looked down at Sam Porter's old, time-worn journal. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting jagged, but still readable. She carefully turned to the next entry, feeling as if she was being pulled back in time, back to 1969. To the survivors, to the nightmare they faced in the heart of the ice. December 25, 1969, the first dawn. After the crash, the wind howled through the fractures in the fuselage, carrying with it a bitter cold that cut like a knife. Sam Porter's eyes fluttered open. Even through the thick layers of his coat, his fingers were numb with frost. Around him, the remaining survivors curled beneath thin blankets, their bodies huddled together against the merciless cold of the Yukon. Odin lay pressed against Sam's side, his warm breath forming faint clouds in the icy air. The German shepherd's eyes flickered open, ears perked, a silent sign of alertness. Outside, the temperature had dropped to -45°C. Sam shifted, pulling his coat tighter around himself. He scanned the shattered remains of the passenger cabin, where 15 souls clung to what little warmth they had left. No one spoke. The exhaustion and fear in their eyes said enough. Then a voice broke the silence, weak but unmistakably clear. "Frank isn't moving." Sam turned sharply. An older man lay motionless in the corner of the cabin. Someone gently shook his shoulder. No response. Frank was dead. Not from injuries from the crash, but from the cold. The air in the cabin seemed to shatter. A few people broke down in sobs. Others panicked, their voices rising into incoherent shouts. Sam clenched his fists. This was only the first day. As the dim daylight pushed through the thick gray clouds, Sam knew they had to act immediately if they wanted to survive. "We need to fortify this space," he told the group. "Use anything we can to block the wind. Find a heat source." There were murmurs of disagreement. A man named Marcus snapped, his voice shaking from the cold. "We can't just sit here and wait to die. We need to get out of here, now." "No one will survive if they go out there now," Sam said firmly. He pointed toward the howling blizzard outside. "We don't even know where we are. If we leave without a plan, we all die." No one argued after that. Beside him, Odin let out a low growl. The German shepherd had sensed the danger before any of them could. Through the morning, the group gathered anything they could find, blankets, seat cushions, scraps of metal from the fuselage, to build a temporary shelter. Sam wrapped blankets around the wounded, while Odin curled up beside them, sharing his warmth. Later that night, as exhaustion set in, Sam opened his journal and wrote one simple truth. None of us would have survived today without Odin. The second night. The wind never stopped howling, slipping through every crack in the wreckage. But inside, Odin was the only source of comfort for the survivors. He wasn't just a dog. He was a soldier, a leader. By midnight, the storm had worsened, nearly burying them in snow. But Odin never slept. Sensing danger before any of them, he nudged Sam awake, just in time to prevent the crushing weight of the snow from suffocating them all. The next morning, as the storm temporarily eased, Odin began sniffing through the wreckage, searching for food or any signs of life. Sam followed close behind. Then, they found it, a supply container, half buried in the snow. It must have been thrown from the cargo hold during the crash. Inside, a small stash of dry food, a few cans of emergency water. Not much, but enough. A survivor whispered, staring at Odin in disbelief. How did he find this? Odin stood there, eyes filled with determination. He understood what was happening. And more than anyone, he knew he was their only hope. But not everyone could hold on. On the third day, a man from the group, Victor, made a reckless decision. "We can't just sit here forever," Victor shouted. "I'm gonna find help." Sam tried to stop him. "You can't go alone. We need a plan, a clear route." "No, I'm not waiting here to die." Before anyone could hold him back, Victor yanked open the fuselage door and vanished into the white void. Odin growled violently, as if he already knew what was coming. 3 hours passed. No sign of Victor, no footsteps leading back. No one in the group dared step outside to search for him. And by the next morning, no one spoke of him again. That night, on the third day, Sam wrote in his journal, "There are 13 of us left. We still have food, but not enough. The temperature keeps dropping. If we don't find a way out soon, none of us will survive." But Odin is still here. He hasn't left. He hasn't given up. He is the last light in this storm. They all knew one thing. As long as Odin didn't give up, neither could they. That night, as the storm raged again, the survivors huddled together, clinging to what little warmth they had left. Odin stood at the edge of the broken fuselage, eyes locked on the distant darkness, ears pricked against the howling wind. He was waiting. But waiting for what? Olivia Hayes turned another page of the journal, her fingers numb from the icy air. The deeper she read, the more she felt the creeping fear that had consumed the survivors in the days that followed. She took a slow, steady breath, her eyes freezing on the next set of jagged, uneven words. "We are not alone." Her grip on the journal tightened, and then she kept reading. Day 4. The darkness outside is more than just the wind. The storm had started to ease, but the cold still cut through their skin like 1,000 blades. The survivors huddled beneath makeshift blankets, stacking torn seat cushions together for warmth. They tried to sleep, but sleep never came, not because of the cold, but because of something else. Something out there. Odin was the first to sense it. All day, he never took his eyes off the darkness outside, the vast, blinding whiteness where no one dared to step. His ears stood tall, his body rigid, his gaze locked on something only he could see. Sam rested a hand on Odin's head, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Odin, what is it?" No bark, just a low, rumbling growl. Then, he fixated on a single point in the darkness. No movement, no sound. But Odin knew something was watching them. By morning, as the faint sun struggled to pierce through the thick clouds, Sam and 2 others left the wreckage to search for more supplies. But they didn't have to go far. Right outside the wreckage, on the snow-covered metal fuselage, deep claw-like scratches ran along the side of the plane. Someone, or something, had left these marks overnight. "It's probably just the wind," one of the survivors muttered, his voice laced with hope. Sam didn't respond. He ran his fingers along the surface, tracing the deep, jagged grooves. These weren't natural scratches. They were long, deep, sharp, like claws. Odin moved in, sniffing around the markings. Then, suddenly, he let out a sharp snort and stepped back. Sam had never seen Odin afraid. He swallowed hard. If Odin refused to go near it, then something was definitely wrong. The 5th night, inside the wreckage, no one spoke. Everything was too quiet. Then suddenly, John, one of the survivors, sat bolt upright, eyes wide. "We're not alone," Sam turned. "What did you say?" John was shaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "I heard someone say my name." Not the wind, not an echo. Someone whispered it, right into my ear. No one responded, but the look in their eyes said everything. They had heard it too. Sam clenched his fists. "It's just the stress. We're all exhausted." But deep down, he didn't believe his own words. In the corner of the cabin, Odin stood motionless. He was staring at the shattered fuselage door where the blizzard still raged outside. He didn't bark, he didn't move. He just stood there, watching, waiting, as if he knew something was coming. The 6th night, the darkness was endless. Sam woke to a low, rumbling growl from Odin. He opened his eyes. The shattered fuselage door was open, and someone was gone. John. Sam shot up, stepping outside, despite the freezing air slicing against his skin. The snow was untouched, except for a single trail of footprints. They led away from the wreckage, disappearing into the darkness. Human footprints. And right beside them were the tracks of a dog. Odin stood beside Sam, completely still. He wasn't the one who had left those prints. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. Sam's breath grew heavy, his pulse pounding in his chest. He looked down at Odin. Odin kept staring in the direction where the footprints had disappeared. But he wasn't growling anymore. He just stood there, as if he already knew they would never find John again. Olivia tightened her grip on the journal. She could feel every heavy heartbeat of Sam Porter echoing through the ink-stained pages. This had gone far beyond just surviving the cold. They weren't just fighting against the brutal wilderness. They were up against something else. Something lurking in the dark. She swallowed hard, then turned to the next page. Day 7, the final storm. Odin sat by the shattered fuselage door, his eyes locked on the distant darkness. He no longer growled. He no longer barked. He just stood watch. Sam couldn't sleep. He knew no one else could either. John was gone. All that remained were his footprints in the snow, accompanied by another set, a dog's tracks. Tracks that no one could explain. The unease deepened as the wind began to howl again. A new blizzard was coming. But this time it was different. The wind screamed like 100 wild beasts howling in rage. Snow poured into the shattered fuselage, sweeping across the huddled survivors, their bodies trembling against the cold. "Odin!" Sam shouted, struggling to stay upright as the wind slammed into him, forcing him to skid across the frozen metal floor. Odin lunged toward the open doorway, using his body to shield them from the storm. But the wind was too strong. Snow whipped through the wreckage, carrying loose metal fragments with it, and then, boom! A section of the aircraft's fuselage collapsed. Someone screamed. Sam staggered, trying to see through the chaos. Then he saw it. Someone was trapped beneath the fallen wreckage. Odin saw them before Sam did, and without hesitation, he ran. Everything happened too fast. Sam watched as Odin threw his entire weight against the fallen wreckage, pushing the trapped survivor out of harm's way. But at that moment, another metal sheet broke loose from above and crashed down onto Odin. "Odin!" Sam lunged forward, his hands clawing frantically at the snow and metal that had buried his dog beneath the wreckage. His voice was raw, his breath ragged as he tore through the icy debris with bare hands. Finally, he pulled Odin free, but the damage was done. Odin's fur was soaked in blood. His hind leg was crushed. A deep gash in his stomach had turned the snow beneath him into a dark, crimson stain. Sam dropped to his knees, cradling Odin's head in his hands. Odin's eyes were still open, but his breathing was fading. Around them, the other survivors stood in stunned silence. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. Sam's body shook, his chest tightening with a grief too heavy to bear. Odin, no, this can't be happening. This dog, their guardian, their protector, had saved them over and over again. He couldn't go like this. Not now. Not like this. But even in his final moments, Odin still had one last thing to do. In that final moment, Odin didn't look at Sam. He looked past him, toward the deep forest beyond where the lizard couldn't hide the darkness lurking behind it. His eyes were focused, unblinking, as if he was warning them. "Odin?" Sam whispered. No response, only the final gaze of a warrior. And then, Odin closed his eyes. His breathing stopped. The world around Sam fell into absolute silence. Odin had given his life to save them. No one could hold back their tears. That night, Sam sat beside Odin, his hand resting gently on the dog's back. He opened his journal and wrote one final entry for the day. "Today, we lost the only light in this storm." But Odin did not die in vain. He saved a life. And before he closed his eyes, he looked into the deep forest. I don't know why, but I can't shake the feeling he was trying to warn us. By morning, the blizzard had passed, but the temperature had plummeted to deadly levels. They all knew. If they didn't leave soon, they would die here. Sam rose to his feet, staring ahead. He didn't want to leave Odin behind. But he also knew Odin would never want them to give up, and so, with heavy hearts, they kept walking, leaving the wreckage. They walked away from the ruins, away from the place where Odin had fallen, toward the forest, the place he had tried to warn them about. The wind howled against the ashen ice as Olivia Hayes turned to the final pages of the journal. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, the strokes growing weaker, as if the writer had been exhausted or losing control. She took a deep breath before reading on. Day 10, the final journey. We left the wreckage. My body aches, but I can't stop moving. We have to keep going. Without Odin, there's nothing left to protect us. We're heading into the forest, following the path Odin warned us about. Day 12, fewer and fewer. There aren't many of us left. Someone disappeared last night. No footprints, no screams, just a trail of steps in the snow, and then they suddenly stop, like they were lifted into the air. I wanted to go back, but no one dares to stop anymore. No one spoke anymore. We just walked step by step, like shadows drifting through the storm. But I knew something was watching us. Day 15. What remains now? Only 3 of us are left. The others are gone. Every night, I hear something moving in the snow. It's not footsteps. It's not an animal. It doesn't sound like anything I've ever heard before. I can feel something behind me, following. But when I turn around, there's nothing. Nothing but endless white. Odin knew. He had known from the very beginning. But I didn't listen. Day 18. The truth we can't escape. I am the last one. Everyone else has disappeared into the darkness. I don't know where they went. No footprints. No signs. The cold no longer touches me. I don't even feel fear anymore. There is only one thing left. Something is waiting for me. The final entry. The journal ends. I don't know what day it is anymore, but I know this will be the last thing I ever write. Odin was right. It's waiting for me. Olivia closed the journal, her hands trembling from the cold. There was nothing else written. No one knew where Sam Porter had gone. No one knew what had happened to the last survivors. They had all vanished without a trace. All that remained were their final footprints, stopping abruptly in the snow, and beside them were the footprints of a dog. The air inside the research tent felt impossibly heavy as Olivia Hayes slowly closed the journal. Around her, the archaeological team sat in stunned silence. No one spoke. No one could. The final words of Sam Porter haunted them all. I am the last one. Odin was right. It's waiting for me. The questions remained. Where did Sam go? And more importantly, why were the footprints of a German shepherd still appearing after 53 years? Olivia took a deep breath. She knew they couldn't leave without finding the truth. The next morning, the research team made their decision. They would follow Sam's path into the deep forest, the same path he had walked 53 years ago. The air was bone-chilling. The wind howled through the towering trees, its echo eerily resembling distant whispers. They had been walking for about an hour when a voice suddenly shouted from ahead. Everyone, look at this. Right in front of them, a small cave entrance, nearly buried beneath layers of ice and thick snow. It looked untouched, as if no one had set foot here in decades. Olivia's heart pounded. Could this be where Sam had gone before he disappeared? The cave's interior was pitch black, but as they shined their flashlights inside, the beams revealed something chilling. Drawings. Crude carvings scratched into the rock, as if someone had desperately tried to leave a final message. One symbol made Olivia shudder. A human handprint. But right beside it, a set of claw marks. The deeper they ventured into the cave, the clearer it became. They were not the first ones here. In the far corner, a skeleton lay motionless. Its tattered clothing had been worn away by time. The bones were fragile, aged, but their size and structure suggested something undeniable. This was one of the last survivors of Pacific Air 412. But that wasn't all. A few meters away, they found another skeleton, a German shepherd. The group fell into silence as they stared at the remains. Odin. Even after half a century, he was still here. Had he survived longer than they ever imagined? Or was there another mystery they had yet to understand? One of the team members examined the remains carefully, and then froze. Something was wrong. Odin's skeleton wasn't decayed like it should have been. It hadn't fully decomposed, a sign that this dog may have lived far longer than anyone had expected. What did that mean? As they stepped out of the cave, Olivia suddenly stopped. A powerful gust of wind rushed through the trees, kicking up swirls of snow into the air. And then, right in front of them, on the untouched white snow, were paw prints. Fresh, new, just appearing. The team stood frozen in place. No one saw a dog, but the paw prints continued to appear, step by step, leading them out of the forest. Olivia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Odin, are you still here? No response. But then, the wind softened, and in that fleeting moment, a faint shape emerged within the snowstorm. A dog, standing there, watching them. And then, it vanished. No one knew what they had just seen. An illusion? Or was Odin truly still here? Olivia and the research team walked away, carrying with them a discovery unlike anything in history. Pacific Air 412 had been found. The last survivors finally had their answers. And Odin, though long gone, might still remain, forever woven into the legend of the Snow Warrior. Before leaving Yukon, Olivia turned back one last time. She knew the story of Odin and Sam Porter would never truly end. It would be told again, and every time a blizzard howled across the Yukon, perhaps Odin was still there, watching, guiding the lost, just as he always had. At last, after more than half a century buried beneath ice and snow, the mystery of Pacific Air 412 had been uncovered. The survivors fought to stay alive, but the ruthless wilderness and something far more unexplainable slowly pulled them into the dark. Only one name remained in the end: Odin, a dog who was more than just a companion, a warrior, a guardian spirit, the only light in the storm. Even after he was gone, his footprints still appeared, 53 years later. As if he had never truly left. Had Odin become part of the legend of the Snow Warrior? Or was it simply a mystery that would never be explained? That question may never have an answer. But one thing is certain: Odin's story of loyalty and sacrifice will never be forgotten. What do you think? Did Odin truly stay behind to guard the Yukon? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you love heartfelt stories about dogs, don't forget to subscribe to Dog Stories and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.